Good morning, everyone, especially to my students in the subject Philippine Constitution. When we had our discussion in the MS Teams, we learned that not all are joining, were not able to join the discussion. And only one thing is certain, there is a problem with respect to their connection. So we had agreed that it is better for us to have this discussion, and it will be shared to you, and you are going to view it from time to time that you want to view it. And after viewing this discussion, then we will be having a meeting again in the Microsoft Teams and other means for you to have your recitation. And the recitation will form part of your class standing in this subject, of course. The first part of the discussion is limited to 3 or 4 or 5 topics only, and after a few days we will be again uploading another topics. Okay, so the discussion is extracted, or the PowerPoint presentation is extracted from a book entitled Everyone's Philippine Constitution. The topics that we are going to discuss this meeting are only the overview on Constitution, the history of Philippine Constitution, the Preamble, the Philippine Territory, and the state policies and principles only. With respect to citizenship and suffrage, we will be setting aside another day for that discussion. No? So I repeat, our discussion today is only for overview, the history, preamble, territory, the principles and policies. Pala, the Constitution is only a part of political law. So I repeat, the Constitution is only a part of political law. Political law is a branch of public law which deals with the organization and operations of the governmental organs of the state and defines the relations of the state with the inhabitants of its territory. There are several laws or divisions of political law, and as I told you, Constitution is only one of them. So some of its branches are political law proper, administrative law, and others. So if you will be asked in your dissertation, what is the distinction between Constitution and political law? The Constitution is only a part of political law. Constitution is defined as a system of fundamental laws for the governance and administration of a nation. It is supreme, imperious, absolute, and unalterable. So, you may ask, what is the use of discussing or incorporating the subject Constitution in our curricula? It is a mandate, or it is expressly stated in the Constitution. If I'm not mistaken, that is in Article 14, Section 3, Paragraph 1 of the Constitution, which expressly states that the study of Constitution must be integrated in the curricula. So, in the Criminology, it is not expressly stated under CMO 5 series of 2018, but as a matter of enriching the curriculum provided by CMO 5 series of 2018. By the way, CMO 5 series of 2018 is the policies, standards, and guidelines for BS Criminology, which amended the CMO 21 series of 2005. So, under the Chen Memorandum Order number 5 series of 2018, Constitution is not stated in the curriculum. But as a matter of enriching the curriculum of the criminology criminology course, then Constitution may be included. What is the legal basis? The Constitution itself, which provides that it must be included in the curricula of every course. What is the purpose of Constitution? By the way, before discussing the purpose of Constitution, where did the Constitution originate? To tell you, the Constitution was first elaborated by Aristotle, but the person who was known as the father of Constitution is no other than James Madison. So I repeat, James Madison, the fourth president of the United States, was known as the father of Constitution. So he was the one who introduced Constitution in the United States. And one of the queries that were asked when Constitution was introduced in the United States was, there are already several laws. There are some statutes, there are some ordinances, and others. So why is it that Constitution must still be included? In other words, why is it that we have several laws and Constitution was still included in it? To tell you, the explanation of James Madison was, we have several laws because we are not angels. If only we are angels, then there is no need for us to enact laws, which is true, isn't it? If we are only angels, then what is the use of enacting several laws? So, Constitution is there in order to regulate some laws. Because if there is a king of all kings, it follows that there must also be the law of all laws, wherein all laws and statutes must be in consonance with it, or they must not contradict the Constitution. So if it follows that if a law will contradict the Constitution, then that law will become invalid. And what is the effect if it will be invalidated? We will be discussing it later on. So what is the purpose, or what are the purposes of Constitution? There are three main purposes of Constitution. So that is to prescribe permanent framework of a system of the government, to assign to several departments their respective duties and responsibilities. So we will be discussing later on that there are three great branches or departments of the government, and we will be discussing each responsibilities of these departments or branches of the government, and to establish certain first principles on which government is founded. So later on, we will be discussing some principles and policies of the state under Article 2 of the 1987 Constitution. So there are three main purposes of Constitution, but it is still believed that the main aim of the Constitution is to prevent anarchy and tyranny. So I repeat, the main aim is still of our Constitution, especially the 1987 Constitution, is to prevent anarchy and tyranny. Anarchy is the absence of government, or it may be the absence of laws. Tyranny, on the other hand, is a condition wherein a country or government is administered by only one person. In other words, the governmental powers are lodged in only one person, that is tyranny. So, I repeat, if you will be asked, what is the principal aim of the Constitution? The principal aim of the Constitution is to prevent anarchy and tyranny. Anarchy is the absence of government and laws. Tyranny, on the other hand, is the condition where a country or government is administered by only one person. So, there are several classifications of Constitution. So, we have written, unwritten, etc. So, we have different classifications, but only one thing is certain. Our Constitution, the Philippine Constitution, especially the 1987 Constitution, is a written one. And it is also a rigid one, which means that it is by itself written. Rigid, on the other hand, means that it is not easily being changed. So, as you observed, there are several presidents who tried to change the 1987 Constitution, especially the current president that we have, but they cannot just do it at the blink of an eye. That is because the Constitution is a rigid one, which means that it is very hard to change it. So, I repeat that under the rigid Constitution, the amendment is a difficult process. So let's go to the division of a constitutional document. When can we say that a constitution is complete? A constitution is complete if it contains these three divisions or these three parts. And these three parts are, first, the Constitution of Government; second, the Constitution of Liberty; next, is the Constitution of Sovereignty. The Constitution of Government contains the provisions which set up the governmental structure. So it sets up the governmental structure. And the parts of the 1987 Constitution which contains the Constitution of Government are the following. First, Article 6, which deals with the legislative department. Next is Article 7, which deals with the executive department. And next is Article 8, which deals with the judicial department. So, in the Constitution of Government, under the 1987 Constitution, the portion of the 1987 Constitution is Articles 6, 7, and 8. The Constitution of Liberty, on the other hand, contains the provisions which guarantee the individual fundamental liberties against governmental abuse. So, this is the provision of the Constitution that will protect the people against the governmental abuse. So, this is stated in the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights of the Constitution is stated under Article 3. Okay, so I repeat, Article 3 of the 1987 Constitution provides for the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is the last discussion that we are going to have in this subject. But according to your teachers in the subject Human Rights Education by the name of Attorney Luisito Pasigon and John Vincent Carmen, they are going to include the discussion of Bill of Rights in that subject. So I repeat, the subject is Human Rights Education. So during our meeting, we have settled that they are going to include the discussion of Bill of Rights in that subject. So for the meantime, I do not know what to do, if I am going to repeat the discussion of the Bill of Rights, or we are going to delete the discussion of Bill of Rights in this subject, Philippine Constitution. And the third division of a constitutional document is the Constitution of Sovereignty. The Constitution of Sovereignty contains the provisions which outline the process whereby the sovereign people may change the Constitution. So as I told you a while back, the Constitution of the Philippines is a rigid one. The process of changing it is very difficult. But there must still be a process of changing it. And the process of changing the 1987 Constitution is stated in Article 17, dealing with the amendments and revisions. So let's go to the doctrine of constitutional supremacy. As I told you a while back, if there is a law, if there is a treaty, if there is an ordinance, statutes, and others that will contradict with the Constitution, then the Constitution must prevail. That is because the Constitution is the fundamental law of a state. So, the Constitution will prevail, and that law, that ordinance, and statute will be invalidated. Mababaliwala ang mga batas na yon. So, our concern only is, what if the Constitution will contradict with an international law? Which will prevail? So, as I repeat, if the law will contradict with the Constitution, then that law will be invalidated and the Constitution will prevail. I'm talking about a national law. What if it is the international law that will contradict with the provision of the Constitution? Which will prevail? So this is explained in the two cases, but let me stress only one case, and that is in the case of Reyes versus Bagatsing. Mayor Bagatsing issued an ordinance in the city of Manila prohibiting the holding of rallies within the radius of 500 feet from the entrance of any foreign embassy. And that main provision of the ordinance was copied from an international law, that is the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. So it is an international law, but it was copied in an ordinance. In Tagalog, international law yan. That is a Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. But ang ginawa ni Mayor Bagatsing is kinopya niya yon, linagay niya sa kanyang ordinance. So, as expected, the Filipino rallies went inside the 500 fit within the entrance of an embassy at nag-conduct sila ng rally. Okay? They staged rally therein. So as a result, they were arrested. So the basis of their arrest was the ordinance issued by Mayor Bhagat Singh. But that ordinance was, I repeat, copied. It was copied from an international law. So, ano ang depensa ng mga rallyista? According to the rallyist, how about our constitutional right of speech and expression? So, to cut the story short, there are two laws that are contradicting here. We have an international law known as the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, and we have the Constitution that are contradicting with each other. So, which of them will prevail? To tell you, according to the Supreme Court in this case, it is our Constitution that will prevail. So, we must respect the freedom of speech and expression of the Filipino people. But to tell you, this is, in my personal opinion, this is a very unfair decision. Why? Because other countries are respecting that international law. But in our case, we disregarded it only because of our freedom of speech and expression, which is commonly being abused. Isn't it? So, but there was a case. I only forgot the title of that case wherein what happened there was the Philippines had a treaty with the United States. Okay, that is a treaty in relation to VFA, in relation to Visiting Forces Agreement. So that treaty was already finalized. So it was already for execution. Afterwards, sabi ng Pilipinas, we cannot comply with the provisions or with our obligations in our treaty. Why? Because it is not in accordance with our Constitution. So, pwede ba yun? Nasasabihin natin na, sorry, we cannot comply with our obligations after signing in the treaty because our Constitution prohibits us in doing so. So, pwede bang gawing reason o palusot ang saligang batas at sasabihin na huwag nang makapag-comply ng obligasyon dahil sa ating saligang batas? To tell you no. So, we cannot do that. No? We cannot just, hindi natin pwedeng gamiting rason ang ating saligang batas only not to comply with our obligation. So, as stated in the Declaration of Rights and Duties of States, as stated under the international law, every state has a duty to carry out in good faith its obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law, and it may not invoke the provision of its constitution as an excuse for failure to perform with this duty. In Tagalog, ang mga bansa dapat kung may pinangako sila sa treaty or international law, kailangan natuparin nila yon. At hindi nila pwedeng gamitin ang kanilang saligang batas bilang palusot para hindi tutupad sa kanilang promises. No? So that is another Supreme Court decision. So if I'm not mistaken, the title of that case is Bayan versus Executive Secretary. Okay. What if a law will be declared unconstitutional? what is the effect? Okay, so I repeat, what if a law will be declared unconstitutional? What is the effect? So there are two views that we must consider. We have the orthodox view or the old view, and we have the modern view. This is the same with our policing system, isn't it? Wherein we have the old concept and we have the modern concept in measuring the effectiveness of our policing system. So under the orthodox view, if a law is declared unconstitutional, that law, if declared unconstitutional, is not a law. It will confer no right. It imposes no duties, no obligations, no protections, so on and so forth. In other words, as if it was not passed in the first place. Katulad ba yan ng mag-ex? Na kung wala na sila, as if hindi naging sila from the beginning up to present. So that is the orthodox view. The modern view, on the other hand, is the rights that were previous, if the law is declared unconstitutional, the rights that were previously given or the duties that were previously given will still be respected. It only happened that in the future, it cannot be enforced anymore. Okay? So that is the modern view. So that is known as the operative fact doctrine. Under the operative fact doctrine, if there is a law, treaty, or ordinance that is considered unconstitutional, the effect will be in the future and it will not affect the past. So it is the same with the prospective characteristic of criminal law, wherein the criminal law will be applied in the future, but it cannot be applied in the past. So I repeat, if the Constitution is declared, if the law is declared unconstitutional, that law can no longer be applied in the future. But those that are affected in the past must still be respected. So let's go to the history of the previous and the present Philippine Constitution. And we all know that the present Constitution is the 1987 Constitution. So first is we have the Malolos Constitution. We all know that the Malolos Constitution was enacted during the time that we are still under the Spanish rule. Okay, so Malolos, because it was enacted at Malolos, Bulacan, way back 1898. Okay, that was, if I'm not mistaken, September 1898. So the Malolos Constitution was ratified. It became effective way back September 1898. So what are the provisions or what are the features of this Malolos Constitution? First is it declared that sovereignty resides exclusively in the people. Second is it enumerated basic civil rights, and the controversial separation of the church and state was ensured, and it called for the creation of the assembly of representatives to act as the legislative body. And the last, which is very important, is it called for the presidential form of government with a president elected for a term of 4 years. So this is the basis of the election of President Emilio Aguinaldo. So Emilio Aguinaldo was elected by virtue of this provision. So by virtue of this also, by the Philippine independence was declared by Emilio Aguinaldo. But to tell you, the independence declared by Emilio Aguinaldo is not an actual independence. It is only an inchoate independence. It is an expected independence, but it is not an actual independence. So when we were under the American rule, the Americans introduced the 1935 Constitution. So you may ask, why is it that we were placed under the American rule or American regime? That is because we lost in the Battle of Manila Part 2. If you are going to scan our Philippine history, isn't it that there are two battles of Manila? We have the Battle of Manila Part 1. That is the battle between the Spaniards and Filipinos combined with US. So magkakampi ang US at Filipinos nung time na yon. Of course, natalo ang Spaniards, so they went away. They went back to Spain. But the problem there is, unknown to the Filipinos, there was the Treaty of Paris, wherein the sovereignty is being passed from Spaniards to the United States. So when the Filipinos learned that the Treaty of Paris, wherein the next invader is the United States, then another battle broke up, and that is the Battle of Manila Part 2. And unfortunately, we lost, or the Filipinos lost in that battle, so we were placed under the American rule. So the 1935, I repeat, was introduced. The 1935 Constitution was introduced by Americans. So some of the important features of the 1935 Constitution is it provided for unicameral National Assembly. So unicameral, uni means one. Ibig sabihin, there is only one chamber of Congress during the time, during 1935. And the president will serve for 6-year term without re-election. Okay, so that is those are some of the important provisions of the 1935 Constitution. But to tell you, way back 1940, there were some important amendments to this 1935 Constitution. And one of the amendments, or the first of the amendments in this 1935 Constitution is the Congress became bicameral. Dalawa na siya. Okay, so like of what we have at present, we have a bicameral Congress. We have the Senate and the House of Representatives. And another change that was introduced by 1940 amendment was the term of office of the president is 4 years, but capable of re-election. So this is the law of the United States up to present, wherein the president will be having a 4-year term, but he is capable of re-election. But aside from the 1940 amendment, there is also the after the 1940 amendment, we were invaded by Japan, and the Japan introduced the 1943 Constitution. So when we were invaded by Japan, to tell you, they promised for an immediate independence. So that is the first feature of the 1943 Constitution, wherein it is intended to prepare the Philippines for independence. But to tell you, this 1943 Constitution did not become fully effective in the Philippines. It only became effective in the places wherein, in the places occupied by Japan. Because not all places in the Philippines were occupied by Japan. So, let's go to the 1973 Constitution. The 1973 Constitution is perhaps the most controversial constitution that the Philippines ever had. So, why is it that this is a little bit controversial constitution that the Philippines ever had? This is because it did not undergo an actual plebiscite. This 1973 Constitution was not approved by an actual plebiscite. It was only informally approved during the barangay assemblies that were organized by the national government. And second is, this 1973 Constitution was enacted during martial law. We all know that martial law was declared way back September 21, 1972 by virtue of Proclamation Order number 1081, okay, wherein Marcos declared martial law entire the Philippines. There are several, napakadaming chismis na sinasabi nila na ang pinaka-reason kung bakit dineclare ang martial law ay so that Marcos will prolong his term of office, which is little bit true during the time, because if you are going to analyze, Marcos was elected and served as president by virtue of the 1935 Constitution. As I told you a while back, there was a 1940 amendment wherein under the 1940 amendment to the 1935 Constitution, the term of office of the elected president is 4 years and capable of re-election once only. Twice, it is already prohibited. Marcos won for the first time when he ran as president, and he won. He again ran for re-election and he again won. Can he run for re-election twice? That is already prohibited under the 1935 Constitution. So, nung malapit nang matapos ang kanyang second term na bawal nang tumakbo, magpa-re-elect for the second time, then the very, very timely, martial law was declared and the Constitution was changed. Wherein one of the features of the 1973 Constitution is it removed the presidential term limit. So, yun, it removed the presidential term limit. So, there is no prohibition for election to speak of. And it provided for the legislative power, it provided that the legislative power is vested in the Batasang Pambansa, and it introduced the parliamentary style of government. So the one that is governing the Philippines during that time is no longer the president, but it is already the prime minister. So in the 1976 amendment to the 1973 Constitution, the president was authorized to legislate. Ibig sabihin, ang ating presidente ay pwede na siyang gumawa ng batas. So, because of that, nandyan yung mga batas natin na presidential decrees. So name some presidential decrees that is applicable in criminology. We have Presidential Decree 603, that is the Child Welfare Code, and we have the Presidential Decree 968, that is the Adult Probation Law. So they are, some of the provisions of those laws are still good provisions at present. So those are some laws that were enacted by the president when he was allowed to legislate by virtue of the 1976 amendment to the 1973 Constitution. So the 1973 Constitution was again little bit changed, or there was some amendments introduced in 1980, wherein it extended the retirement age of the members of the judiciary to 70 years. In 1981, there was again another amendment to the 1973 Constitution, wherein the executive power was restored, binalik ang executive power sa ating president. From Prime Minister, binalik sa president. And there is a direct election of president. Binalik na naman yung direct election of the president. So, comes now the 1987 Constitution. So, you may ask, what happened? Why is it that we have the 1987 Constitution from 1973? So the 1973 had undergone several amendments. Afterwards, the 1987 Constitution was enacted. So what happened? Way back 1986, President Marcos was interviewed by an international media man, and one of the accusations against Marcos was he was no longer the choice of the Filipino people. So hindi na daw siya ang gusto ng mga Pilipino na president ng Pilipinas. So of course, nasaktan ang pride ng ating president. So he wants to show to the whole world that he is still the choice of the Filipino people. How? By asking a snap election. Snap election kasi bigla na election, it is not a scheduled election. So, nag-one-on-one sila kay Corazon Juanco Aquino, and after the snap election, Marcos was declared as the winner for about 1 million votes. Okay, I repeat, that was 1986. But the camp of Cory Aquino also claimed that Cory Aquino was the one who must be the winner in that election. So there are several things that happened until such time that the EDSA-1 took place. When EDSA-1 took place, we do not really know what happened there. The family of Marcos was fetched by a chopper. Sinakay siya sa helicopter. Akala ng Marcos daw ay pupunta sila sa Paway, Ilocos, only to find out dinala pala sila sa Hawaii. So there was an allegation of the Marcos family that they were kidnapped. And during that time, Marcos wanted to go back to the Philippines. But of course, the current administration, Cory administration, did not want him to go back. He was only allowed to go back here in the Philippines when Marcos was already dead. So when Cory Aquino was placed in power by virtue of the EDSA-1 revolution, she issued some proclamations in order to govern our country, because when she was placed in, when President Cory Aquino was placed in power, the 1973 Constitution was suspended. That was suspended, but she issued Proclamation number 3, which is also known as the Freedom Constitution. So I repeat, if you will be asked, what is the Freedom Constitution during the time of Cory Aquino? That was Proclamation number 3. One of the important features of that proclamation is it adopted some provisions of the 1973 Constitution intended for transition. So another is that proclamation granted the president the broad power to reorganize the government and remove current officials from their office. So aside from the proclamation number 3, President Corazon Aquino also issued proclamation number 9, which the proclamation number 9 created the Constitutional Commission. So proclamation number 3 is a Freedom Constitution, and proclamation number 9 is the law that created the Constitutional Commission that will craft or will draft, sila ang gagawa sa bagong saligang batas. That Constitutional Commission is known as CONCOM. In abbreviation, it is known as CONCOM, Constitutional Commission. Ilan members? 50 members. The Constitutional Commission that will be crafting the new Constitution is consisted of 50 members, and almost all professions are included therein, are represented. Almost all professions are represented. Do not worry, because in the criminology profession, we were represented. The criminology profession was represented by Teodoro Natividad. Teodoro Natividad is a former congressman of Bulacan, who is also known as the father of criminology in the Philippines. Not only that, he is also known as the father of probation, because together with Bhagat Singh, they were, Teodoro Natividad was the one who crafted the provisions of Presidential Decree 968, the adult probation law of the Philippines. And it was also Teodoro Natividad who incorporated the provisions of the Constitution in relation to the policing system. If you still recall the discussion in Layer 1, that is in law enforcement organization and administration, isn't it that you were asked to memorize the provision of Section 6, Article 16 of the Constitution, which states that the Philippines shall establish and maintain one police force, which shall be national in scope and civilian in character, to be administered and controlled by the National Police Commission. And the authority of the local government units within their respective jurisdiction shall be provided by law. So the one who incorporated that portion of the Constitution was Teodoro Natividad. So after the Constitutional Commission did their job in crafting the new Constitution, the Constitution was subjected to plebiscite for ratification. Plebiscito. Okay? Tatanungin ng mga tao, gusto nyo ba sa bagong saligang batas na ito o hindi? So, overwhelmingly, napakadami ang bumoto sa yes, gusto namin sa bagong saligang batas. So that's it. The 1987 Constitution was enacted. First of the features of the 1987 Constitution is it established the Fifth Philippine Republic, and it restores the presidential form of government. Okay, let's go to first. The Fifth Philippine Republic. We are in the Fifth Philippine Republic at present. When will this Fifth Philippine Republic be abolished? We do not know. Another question is, if this is the Fifth Philippine Republic, then when was the first? When was the second? When was the third? When was the fourth? The first Philippine Republic was proclaimed by the Malolos Constitution way back 1899. So during that time, our president was Emilio Aguinaldo. But that first Philippine Republic only survived for about 2 or 3 years because it ended when Emilio Aguinaldo was captured at Palanan, Isabela. The second Philippine Republic was introduced by Japan. When they introduced the 1943 Constitution, it only happened that Japan did not last that long. They were defeated in World War II, and the Japanese soldiers retreated. They went back to Japan. So the Second Philippine Republic was abolished. It was established way back 1943. I repeat, by virtue of the 1943 Constitution, but it was abolished way back 1945. Our president during that time was Laurel. The third Philippine Republic was given by the United States way back 1946. So when was this third Philippine Republic abolished? It was dissolved by the proclamation of martial law, especially that under the 1973 Constitution, the form of government was changed into parliamentary style of government, no longer presidential form. And the fourth Philippine Republic was established way back 1981. When you remember my discussion a while back, in the 1973 Constitution, may amendment of may pinalitan doon noong 1981 at binalik yung presidential form of government. But this Fourth Philippine Republic was ended when Marcos was removed from office. So I repeat, this 1987 Constitution established the Fifth Philippine Republic. And it also restores the presidential form of government. When can we say that a government is presidential form? Kung president ba ang head? To tell you no. The determining factor is if there are three great branches, I'm talking about the executive, legislative, judiciary, that are separate and equal footing with each other, then that is an indication of presidential form of government. There are several features of the 1987 Constitution, and we cannot discuss them one by one. So let's go now to the discussion of the 1987 Constitution. The 1987 Constitution is consisted of 18 articles. So 18 articles all in all. So it is better for you to memorize these 18 articles. Perhaps the one that will be asked in your recitation is, what is Article 1? What is Article 15? What is Article 10? Ganyan ang recitation ninyo. No? So it is better for you to memorize them. But if you are going to scan our Constitution, you will be surprised that the first part of the Constitution is the Preamble. Do not worry, I will not be asking you to memorize the Preamble. But that is the first part of the, that is stated in the 1987 Constitution. Is it mandatory for a Constitution to have a Preamble? To tell you no. It is not mandatory for a Constitution to have a Preamble. Because like of what I told you a while back, there are three things that must be considered for a Constitution to be complete. We have the Constitution of Government, liberty, and sovereignty. Preamble is not one of them. So Preamble is not a mandatory part of the Constitution. But to tell you, it is better for us to have one. Because the Preamble will be, it will be assisting us in interpreting the provisions of the Constitution. The Preamble is an introduction, or it is a foreword of the Constitution, and it is derived from a Latin word, preambulare, which means to walk before. Okay, so preambulare means to walk before. By the way, the preamble of the 1987 Constitution goes this way. We, the sovereign Filipino people, imploring the aid of Almighty God in order to build a just and humane society and to establish a government that shall embody our ideals and aspirations, promote the common good, conserve and develop our patrimony, and secure to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of independence and democracy under the rule of law and a regime of truth, justice, freedom, love, equality, and peace, do ordain and promulgate this Constitution. So there are several technical terms that are stated under the preamble. So it is better for you to have the different definition of terms for you to understand them. Speaking of the definition of terms, the secrets definition of terms, that is one of the strategies that we have we used in order to facilitate the discussion. Common sense dictates that there is a means, or there must be some means and ways that must be resorted to in order to assist the students understand the subjects that they are taking. So because of that, the faculty members of the CCGE of Tarlac State University wrote the definition of terms, and that is intended especially for the students during this new normal, wherein there is no face-to-face or the limited tradition or the traditional face-to-face approach in teaching was limited. We have also the Philippine territory. Article 1 of the Constitution discusses the Philippine territory. So, what is included in the Philippine territory? So, before discussing what are included in Article 1 or the Philippine territory, we must state the provision of Section 1. And do not worry, because like Preamble, I will not be asking you to memorize the national territory. Under Article 1 of the Constitution, the national territory comprises the Philippine archipelago, with all the islands and waters embraced therein, and all other territories over which the Philippines have sovereignty or jurisdiction, consisting of its terrestrial, fluvial, and aerial domains, including its territorial sea, the seabed, the subsoil, the insular shelves, and other submarine areas, the waters around, between, and connecting the islands of the archipelago, regardless of their breadth and dimension, form part of the internal waters of the Philippines. You may ask, sir, why is it that you use the word waters? Isn't it that in the rule on grammar, the plural form of water is water? It is not waters. Like people, wherein the plural form of people is people, not peoples. To tell you, that is the distinction between a legal term and a common term. If you will be asking an English teacher, of course, he or she will be telling you that that is grammatically wrong. But in the legal parlance, that is acceptable. So you can use waters, you can use peoples. So, as I told you, all the islands and waters embraced in the Philippine archipelago form part of the internal waters of the Philippines. So, and what are, aside from waters, we are also dealing with terrestrial or land, and we are also dealing with aerial domains or air. So, do we own the air up to the outer space? We can say yes, but we must respect other countries in using it, especially in innocent passage. So, let's go to internal waters. As I told you, paulit-ulit na ito. The internal waters is consisted of the waters around, between, and connecting the islands of the archipelago, regardless of their breadth and dimension. So this is the internal waters. So this may be asked in your recitation next meeting. Perhaps the question is, will you state the internal waters of the Philippines as stated in the Constitution? Under the Archipelagic Doctrine or Archipelago Theory, for clarification, this Archipelagic Doctrine or Archipelago Theory is applicable only in archipelago. And we all know that an archipelago is consisted of groups of islands surrounded by water. In a country that is landlocked, ibig sabihin ng landlocked ay north, south, east, west ay land, lupa, this archipelagic doctrine is not applicable. Under the archipelagic doctrine or archipelago theory, how can we determine the territory of a state? That is just connecting the outermost island of an archipelago by means of an imaginary line. And all that are enclosed by the imaginary line will be considered as part of the territory of that country. Aside from that, we have what we call the regime of islands. So, it was Republic Act 9522 which introduced itong tinatawag natin na regime of islands. And we are talking about the Kalayaan Island Group as constituted under the Presidential Decree 1596. And we have the Bajo de Masinloc, which is also known as the Scarborough Shoal, the controversial islands that we have at present, because it was it is already occupied by China. So, if you will be asked, what are the regime of islands? We are talking about the Kalayaan Island Group and the Bajo de Masinloc or the Scarborough Shoal. So, aside from this, you must understand the distinction between a territorial sea and the exclusive economic zone. What is stated in the PowerPoint presentation is only economic zone, but the complete term for that is exclusive economic zone. The territorial sea is consisted of 12 miles from baseline. You may ask, where is that baseline? The baseline is the imaginary line that I told you a while back. Connect the outermost island of the Philippine territory, okay, by means of an imaginary line, and that imaginary line will become the baseline. And the exclusive economic zone is the 200 miles from baseline. So there was an accusation or there was an assertion that we own the Kalayaan group of islands. We own the Bajo de Masinloc or the Scarborough Shoal because they are within the exclusive economic zone. But we do not know kung bakit napunta yan sa China. So, if you will be asked, I repeat, in your recitation, will you state the distinction between the territorial sea and the exclusive economic zone? The answer is very simple. Just say the territorial sea has a measurement of 12 miles from baseline, but the exclusive economic zone, the measurement is 200 miles from baseline. Let's go to state policies and principles. That is Article 2 of the Philippine Constitution. The 1987 Constitution enumerated for 28 state policies and principles. So it is very, very far from the provisions of the 1973 Constitution, because the 1973 Constitution provided for more or less 10, but at present we have 28 provisions of the state policies and principles. So what is the distinction between principles and state policies? The principles are binding. Ibig sabihin, ang principles, kailangan na sundin natin yan. But policies are only guidelines. Pwedeng sundin, pwedeng hindi sundin. Okay, so that is the distinction. I repeat, the principles are binding. Kailangan na sundin natin yan. But policies, pwede nating sundin, pwedeng hindi sundin. So, as I told you a while back, there are 28 state principles, state policies and principles. So it is very impossible for us to discuss them one by one, or else aabutin tayo ng ilang oras. So what I did was I selected only some important provisions or some cases that are related to this Article 2 of the Constitution or the state policies and principles. So Section 1, Article 2 of the Constitution states that the Philippines is a democratic and republican state. Sovereignty resides in the people, and all government authority emanates from them. So we are talking about a state here. So when can we say that a state is a state? A state may be considered as such only when it complies with the elements. It must have people, it must have territory, it must have government, and sovereignty or independence. So the people are the inhabitants of a state. There is no minimum number requirement for a people, for a state to be qualified as a state. There is no minimum number. In fact, Vatican City is considered as a state, but its population is more or less 800 only. So there is no number of inhabitants or people. Territory, on the other hand, we already discussed territory. It is a portion of the earth wherein we can reside, and it is consisted of terrestrial, fluvial, and aerial domains. Government, on the other hand, is, okay, this is people, dito palang people, this is the territory, and we have the government. The government is the agency or the instrumentality through which the will of the state is formulated, expressed, and realized. There are two forms of government or classifications of government. We have the de jure and we have the de facto. So, de jure or de jure, some say de jure, is it is a government that has a rightful title or control. So, walang question o walang tanong-tanong sa kanyang legality kung bakit siya nandyan. So, the creation of that government there is no problem with its legality, so it is de jure, unlike de facto. The de facto government has three classifications. So we have the de facto proper. So An example of de facto proper is paano kung so under the de facto proper, it is a government wherein it gets possession or control of or usurps by means of force by the voice of majority. So take note that one element of de facto is there must be force. So we will be applying it in EDSA 1 revolution. After the EDSA 1 revolution, tinanggal si Marcos, pinaupo si Cory Aquino. Is that government of Corazon Aquino a de jure, or a de facto government? To tell you, the Aquino administration or government is a de jure or de jure government because it was a product of a peaceful revolution. But if it is not a peaceful or a bloody revolution, then that will be considered as a de facto government. Another is the government of paramount force. Paano kung sinakop tayo ng China? Binomba tayo ng China, sinakop tayo ng China, and they will be establishing a government here. So that is a de facto government. And another form of de facto government is independent government established by inhabitants of a country who rise insurrection against the parent state. Paano kung nung sakop pa tayo ng US, example lang kinalaban natin ng US, nanalo tayo, pinatalsik natin ng US dito. So we will now be establishing a government. So that is a de facto government because it is a government that is established by inhabitants of a country who rise in insurrection against the parent state. Ang parent state natin ay kung sino ang may sakop sa atin. So, yun. Ito pala sa PowerPoint presentation Naghirap pa ako. Okay? So, the de facto government is we have the de facto proper wherein that government was established through by force, by the voice of majority. But I told you, the EDSA 1 revolution is not de facto because it was a product of peaceful revolution. Next is government by paramount force. Sinakop tayo. Nag-establish sila ng government dito. That is government of paramount force. That is a de facto government. And next is, kung tayo ay sakop ng ibang bansa, kinalaban natin yon, nanalo tayo, pinatalsik natin, and we establish another government, that is a de facto government. So, let's go to the two functions of government. We have the constituent or mandatory, and we have the ministrant or directory. Ibig sabihin, dalawa ang classification ng function ng government. Yung mandatory ay talagang kailangan na gawin nila yon. Okay? They must perform that. Hindi pwedeng hindi nila gagawin yon. And next is ministrant or merely directory. So, you may ask, bakit kailangan nating i-classify ang functions ng government if it is mandatory or if it is ministrant? That is because if the government is performing a mandatory function, kung sakaling may nasaktan o may na-damage, hindi liable ang government dyan. Pero kung ang government ay, ang ginagawa lang niya ay ministrant or merely directory function, kung may nasaktan o kung may damage, mananagot ang government dyan. Okay? So, Let's go to the case of Torio versus Fontanilla. Okay, what happened here? What happened here was there was a municipal fiesta. So it was organized by the municipal government. Yung municipal fiesta na yon. So during the municipal fiesta, may naaksidente, namatay. Ang issue ay mananagot ba ang mananagot ba ang local government sa pagkamatay ng tao na yan during the municipal fiesta? So, yes or no? Alamin muna natin. Ministrant function ba yan? Or mandatory function yan? Mandatory ba na kailangan magkaroon ng fiesta? To tell you no. So, ibig sabihin, it is a ministrant function. Kaya kung ministrant function or directory function lang yan, mananagot ang local government. So, in the case of Torio versus Fontanilla, I repeat, fiesta, may namatay dahil sa fiesta na inorganize ng local government, mananagot ba ang local government? Yes! Because fiesta is not a mandatory function of government. It is only a ministrant or directory function of the government. Paano kung yung DPWH, gumagawa sila ng kalsada? Hindi naman nagpabaya ang DPWH. But accident occurred, may namatay. Mananagot ba ang DPWH? No, because that is a mandatory function. Okay? Sa paggawa ng ating kalsada, that is a mandatory function. Next is sovereignty. Sovereignty means freedom. Okay? Kalayaan. So, before a state will be considered as a state, kailangan na siya ay may kalayaan o sovereignty. So, there are two aspects of sovereignty. We have the internal sovereignty, and we have the external sovereignty. So, internal sovereignty is supreme and absolute power of the state to enforce its will on the people within its territory. Kaya ang government natin, pwede niyang may kalayaan siya na gawin niya lahat ang gusto niyang gawin sa kanyang nasasakupan. External sovereignty, on the other hand, is the independence of the state from control of other state. Hindi tayo dapat kontrolado ng ibang estado. That is external sovereignty. So I repeat, what is internal sovereignty? Yung kakayahan ng government na gawin lahat ang gusto niyang gawin within its territory. External sovereignty, yan ay yung kalayaan natin na huwag makialam ang ibang bansa. Because we have the sovereignty or we have the freedom. So, this is a definition of internal sovereignty. You must memorize it. And this is the definition of external sovereignty. So, one of the cases to explain sovereignty is in the case of people of the Philippines versus Gozon. This happened at Olongapo, Zambales. During 1980s and 1990s, some portion of Olongapo, Zambales was leased to the Americans. So, pina-lease natin. In other words, nangupahan ang Americans sa atin. So, during that time, there was an ordinance may ordinance na nagsasabi na bago magpatayo ng bahay, kailangan na mag-secure o kailangan na kukuha ng permit from the municipal mayor. May nagpagawa ng kanyang bahay by the name of Goson sa Olongapo, hindi siya kumuha ng mayor's permit. Kaya sabi ng Office of the Mayor, pwedeng sirain ang bahay na yan kasi walang mayor's permit o hindi tuloy ang pag-construct. So, yan ang napakalinaw na sabi ng Municipality of Olongapo. Goson, kailangan na may mayor's permit ka or else huwag mo nang ituloy ang construction na yan. Ang depensa naman ni Goson, bakit pa kailangan ang mayor's permit? Eh itong Olongapo ay na-lease o occupied ng Americans. Kaya hindi na pwede ang mayor's permit coming from the mayor's office. Tama ba si Goson? To tell you no. Nung pinagamit natin ang Olongapo, Zambales sa Americans, hindi nangangahulugan na pati yung administration at lahat-lahat ng aspeto doon sa Olongapo ay binigay natin sa Americans. Still, that is ours. Still, it must comply with some of the requirements of our government. So that is in the case of people of the Philippines versus Goson. Let's go to war. So, war is defined as a contention by force or the act of paralyzing the forces of an enemy. Why is it that we must discuss war? Because Section 2 of Article 2 of the Constitution states that the Philippines renounces war as an instrument of national policy. So, ayaw natin sa giyera. So, Section 2 of the Constitution also provides that the Philippines adopts the generally accepted principles of international law as part of the law of the land. And also, Section 2 provides that the Philippines adheres to the policy of peace, equality, justice, freedom, cooperation, amity with all nations. We will be concentrating in war. When we say the Philippines renounces war as an instrument of national policy, we are talking about offensive war. There are two kinds of wars. We have the offensive war and we have the defensive war. Ang offensive war, yan ay yung tayo ang magsisimula ng giyera. Yan ang pinagbabawal ng ating saligang batas. When we say defensive war, dumepensa lang tayo. Sinakop tayo ng ibang bansa, dumepensa lang tayo. Pwede ba natin baliwalain yan? So, we cannot. We cannot renounce defensive war. But what we can renounce only is offensive war. So, the offensive war, the war is offensive on the part of the government which commits the first act of violence. Kaya kung inatake natin ang China, we are involved in an offensive war, and that is the one that is prohibited by the Constitution. Defensive war, on the other hand, is sinakop tayo ng China, dumepensa tayo. So, can we do it? Yes. No? We cannot renounce. Hindi natin pwedeng baliwalain ang defensive war. Article 2 states that the Philippines adopts the generally accepted principles of international law as part of the law of the land. Ito ang tinatawag natin na Doctrine of Incorporation. Kaya kung tanungin ko kayo sa recitation, will you state the Doctrine of Incorporation? Ang sagot, The doctrine of incorporation states that the Philippines adopts the generally accepted principles of international law as part of the law of the land. Which means that kung may international law at favorable naman sa Pilipinas, automatic batas na yan sa Pilipinas. Okay? Hindi kailangan na gawing formal na batas yan bago maging effective dito sa Pilipinas. Automatic effective na yan sa Pilipinas. To illustrate the doctrine of incorporation, we have the case of Medjoff versus Director of Prisons. What happened in this case? Si Medjoff ay isang Russian. According to Japan, siya daw ay spy. So nahuli siya sa Shanghai, China na spy. That is according to Japan. Dinala nila dito sa Pilipinas. At kinulong dito sa Pilipinas. Ang pagiging spy naman ay hindi na naman talaga crime yan. Okay? Hindi naman talaga crime yan. In fact, we are not affected. Kahit na kung sabihin natin na crime yan, okay, we are not affected. Si Medjoff, hinuli sa Shanghai ng Japan dahil spy daw, tapos dinala dito sa Pilipinas at ang participation lang natin dito sa Pilipinas, dito kinulong. Okay? Dito kinulong si Mr. Medjoff. So, dito naman sa Pilipinas, nung wala na ang Japan government, basta kinulong lang natin. What is the basis? Dahil sabi ng Japan, siya ay spy. So, sabi ng Philippine authorities, ito ang gawin natin. Habang walang Russian vessel na kumukuha kay Medjoff na ito, siya ay nakakulong. Ikukulong natin. Kung common sense ang gagamitin natin, pwede ba yon? According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, no alien shall be detained for an unreasonable length of time. Hindi pwedeng i-detain ang isang alien ng unreasonable time. Kung pwede siyang pakawalan, pakawalan na. Yan ang nakalagay sa ating Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Kailangan bang respetuhin natin yung Universal Declaration of Human Rights na yun? Yes. Kailangan na respetuhin natin. So that international law is automatic part of our law. That is an illustration of doctrine of incorporation, which provides again that the principles of international law, yung international law natin, will form part of our law. Automatic batas na natin yan. Kaya kailangan na respetuhin natin ang international law kasi automatic batas natin yan. Another illustration of the of this doctrine of incorporation is in the case of Kuroda versus Halandoni. It is sikat na kaso ito. Kuroda is a general of Japan. Nung sinakop nila ang Pilipinas, they violated some international laws in relation to dealing with non-combatants. Alam nyo kasi, under the international law, kung sakaling may giyera, hindi pwedeng saktan ang non-combatants, yung mga sibilyan. So, that is under the laws and customs of war, which is an international law. So, inulit ko, si Kuroda, hinayaan niya ang kanyang mga tauhan na saktan ang mga civilians or non-combatants. After the war, nahuli siya. So, kinasuhan na siya ng violation of laws and customs of war dito sa Pilipinas. Ano ang depensa ni Kuroda? Hindi nyo ako pwedeng kasuhan ng international law, violation ng international law. Why? dahil ang Pilipinas ay hindi siya signatory sa international law na yan. Pwede bang maging depensa yon? No. Because under the doctrine of incorporation, ang international law na yan, automatic batas natin dito sa Pilipinas. Kaya pwede ba siyang managot? Yes. Because that international law is an automatic law in the Philippines under the doctrine of incorporation. So, let's go to civilian authority over the military. So, dapat ang civilian authority at all times supreme over the military, which is stated under Section 3, Article 2 of the Constitution. So, Section 3, Article 2 of the Constitution states that civilian authority is at all times supreme over the military. The armed forces of the Philippines is the protector of the people and the state. Its goal is to secure the sovereignty of the state and the integrity of national territory. That is what is stated in Section 3. So, ang sikat na kaso to explain this is, okay, so I repeat, the principle that is stated under the Constitution is ang civilian dapat mas mataas kaysa sa military at all times sa lahat ng pagkakataon. There was a case entitled Integrated Bar of the Philippines versus Zamora. Okay, that is IBP, the Integrated Bar of the Philippines versus Zamora. What happened in this case? So, way back 2000, there are several bombings, pambobomba sa metropolitan area. So, ang ginawa ng ating president by the name of President Estrada is kinuha niya ang Marines o military sa Mindanao, tapos dineploy niya sa Metro Manila. Kaya mga military na ang nagkakandak ng patrol sa metropolitan area. So according to the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, that is in violation of the Constitution. Kasi nakalagay sa Constitution, dapat ang civilian mas mataas kaysa sa military. Kaya ano ang ginawa daw ng ating president? Kinuha niya ang military at siya ang nagbantay sa mga civilian. Kaya violation yan ng ating saligang batas. Tama ba ang Integrated Bar of the Philippines? According to the Supreme Court, no. According to the Supreme Court, nung kinuha ng ating president ang military at dineploy sa metropolitan area for them to assist the PNP in maintaining peace and order, hindi nangangahulugan na mas mataas ang military kaysa sa civilian. Why? Kasi nung dineploy ang military, sila ay linagay under sa authority ng PNP. We all know that the Philippine National Police is civilian in character. So, still, hindi na-violate yung saligang batas na yun. So, still, the civilian is supreme over the military. So, in relation naman, in relation sa pagiging, anong tawag dito? Sa pag-serve sa AFP, sikat din na kaso ito. Why is it that we have this case? Under Section 4 of Article 2 of the Constitution, nakalagay kasi dyan na the prime duty of the government is to serve and protect the people. The government may call upon the people to defend the state. O, napakalinaw doon. Sabi ng ating saligang batas, pwedeng ang government ay pwede niya sabihin sa mga tao na depensahan ang ating estado. At ang pagdepensa sa ating estado ay yung actual defense, hindi yung keyboard warriors. No? Hindi yan ang kailangan ng ating government. Kaya na nga medyo nakakalungkot, na pagdating sa comment sa social media, mukhang matatapang ang mga tao, but ayaw naman nilang mag-ROTC. So this is exactly what happened in the case of people of the Philippines versus Lagman. Nung nagkaroon ng giyera, lahat ng able-bodied men, yung mga kalalakihan, sinabihan na maging members ng military. Ang nakakalungkot doon, may mga tao na ayaw. Sabi ng iba, ayaw kong pumatay. I do not want to kill. At ayaw kong mamatay or be killed. Sabi naman ng iba, I do not have military inclination. Ibig sabihin, wala akong hilig sa military. Ang hilig ko lang ay maggupit, magluto, pero wala akong hilig sa military. Pwede bang pagbigyan? Okay, ang issue sa kaso na ito ay, pwede bang pagbigyan ang mga tao na yon? Ang palusot ng mga tao na yon? Sabi ng Supreme Court, no. Kung sinabi ng government natin na mag-serve sa military to protect the people, all of us must do it. All the able-bodied men must do it. Okay? Walang kung anong-anong palusot. Let's go to the separation of church and state. Alam niyo itong Section 6, Article 2 of the Constitution, which provides that the separation of the church and state shall be inviolable. Ito ay napakaliit na sentence sa ating saligang batas. But ito ay isa sa pinaka-controversial at pinaka-complicated. So, I repeat, Section 6 states that the separation of the church and state shall be inviolable. So, ibig sabihin, hindi pwedeng diktahan ng church ang state. At ang state naman, hindi niya pwedeng diktahan ang church. They must be separate entity. Pero hindi nangangahulugan na sila ay magkaaway. They must help each other for a common good. So you may ask, is the separation of the church and state a reality or a fantasy? To tell you, theoretically, there must be separation. But medyo nakakalungkot lang that one are dictating another. No? Especially the Catholic Church, that is always dictating the state what to do or what not to do. No? But by the way, let me make a clarification. I do not have, I am not against the Catholic Church. It only happened that that is only one of my observations. No? To tell you, if you are going to combine church and state, it will result to a very chaotic situation. The state will not survive. So, let's go to the case of Austria versus NLRC. NLRC is the National Labor Relations Commission. So, what happened in this case? Si Austria ay isang pastor. Katulad ng chairperson natin dito sa Criminology, siya ay isang pastor. So, he is a pastor of the Seventh-day Adventist. Kaya empleyado siya. May sweldo siya, may benefit siya, at ang nagbabayad ay yung Seventh-day Adventist. So, nagka-problema lang sila sa collection. Sabi ng Seventh-day Adventist, Pastor Austria, bakit konti ang collection ngayon? Hindi katulad noon. Kaya inakusahan nila si Pastor Austria na kinukupit daw niya ang collection, no? So agad-agad siya ay tinanggal. Okay? Pastor Austria was removed as an officer, as a pastor of the Seventh-day Adventist. Nag-complain na ngayon si Pastor Austria sa labor. Sabi ni Pastor Austria, labor, makialam ka nga, bakit ako dinismiss ng Seventh-day Adventist? Sabi ng labor, illegal dismissal ang ginawa ninyo, Seventh-day Adventist. ibalik nyo siya bilang pastor. O ano naman ang sabi ng Seventh-day Adventist? Read Section 6, Article 2 of the Constitution. Ang nakalagay doon, walang pakialaman ang Estado, huwag nyo kaming pakialaman church, at kami na church, hindi kami makikialam sa Estado. So, tama ba yon? Tama bang sabihin ng church na ikaw, Estado, hindi mo kami pwedeng pakialaman kung tinanggal namin ang aming pastor? According to the Supreme Court, no. According to the Supreme Court, totoo na ang Estado hindi niya pwedeng pakialaman ang church. But, kung ang church ay linabag o violate niya ang batas, makikialam ang Estado to enforce the law that was violated. Kaya pwede bang sabihin ng Estado na illegal dismissal ang ginawa nyo sa inyong pastor, kaya ibalik nyo to? To tell you yes. Because the church violated the law on labor. So, let's go to the policy of freedom from nuclear weapon. Alam nyo naman what happened at Beirut. Diba? So, if you'll just imagine that, they at Lebanon, okay? So, medyo nakakalungkot, ano? Pwede bang mangyari ang, what happened at Lebanon, Beirut, Lebanon? Can that happen here in the Philippines? To tell you, I don't know. Okay? Only one thing is certain. Under Section 8, Article 2 of the Constitution, nakalagay doon na the Philippines, consistent with the national interest, adopts and pursues a policy of freedom from nuclear weapons in its territory. Dapat wala tayong nuclear weapon. And the nuclear weapon that I'm talking about is the thing that will devastate or that will destroy our community. Hindi yung nuclear weapon na beneficial sa atin. Katulad ng Bataan Nuclear Power Plant. Pwede yun. Because it is beneficial to us. Ang pinagbabawal dito, yung sandatang nuclear. Hindi pwedeng i-stock dito sa Pilipinas. Kasi baka by accident, sasabog yan, mawawala sa mapa ang Pilipinas. Which is exactly what happened at Lebanon. If you will just imagine that, saan ka naman nakakita ng matinong government na in-stock nila ang combustible materials in the center of the city? So, by accident, it exploded, it killed several persons and destroyed property, so on and so forth. Okay? Yan ang iniiwasan ng ating saligang batas. Na kung pwede lang, ayaw natin sa nuclear weapon na mag-store dito sa Pilipinas because instead of helping us, it may destroy us. Let's go to the life of the unborn. So, this is stated in Section 12, Article 2 of the Constitution, which states that the state recognizes the sanctity of the family life and shall protect and strengthen the family as a basic autonomous social institution, and it shall equally protect the life of the mother and the life of the unborn from conception. The natural and primary right and duty of parents in the rearing of the youth for civic efficiency and the development of moral character shall receive support of the government. So we are talking about life of the unborn from conception. When can we say that there is life? To tell you, that is debatable. Only one thing is certain. If there is conception, in legal term, we are calling it as conception. But in science, they are calling that as fertilization. If there is the meeting of the egg cell and sperm, that is already protected by the Constitution. It cannot be destroyed, or it cannot be removed, or it cannot be killed, except in therapeutic abortion in order to save the life of the mother. So comes now the case of Roe versus Wade. To tell you, to summarize the case of Roe versus Wade, in the United States, abortion is legal. Abortion is legal provided that it must be done within the first 6 months of pregnancy. After 6 months of pregnancy, hindi na pwede ang abortion. Pwede bang i-adapt ang decision ng US Supreme Court dito sa Pilipinas? Ang Roe versus Wade na ito? To tell you no. Kasi napakalinaw sa ating saligang batas, nakalagay doon na they state shall give protection to the child from conception. Kaya hindi pwedeng i-adapt ang decision ng US Supreme Court dito sa Pilipinas as much as Roe versus Wade is concerned. Let's go to the case of Oposa versus Factoran. Bakit tayo nagkaroon ng kaso na Oposa versus Factoran? So, this is stated under the Section 15 of the Section 15, Article 2 of the Philippine Constitution. Nakalagay kasi doon na the state shall protect and promote the right to health of the people and instill health consciousness among them. At yung Section 16, nakalagay na the state shall protect and advance the right of the people in a balanced and healthful ecology in accord with the rhythm and harmony of nature. Ibig sabihin, ang ating estado, dapat proteksyonan niya ang ating environment at ang ating nature. Or our environment. Yes, our environment. So, what happened in this Oposa versus Factoran is, may mga minors na observe nila na in their community that there are some group of people who are cutting trees. Sabi ng mga minors, bakit nyo pinuputol ang mga puno na yan? Considering the fact na kami ang makikinabang in the future. Sabi ng mga loggers, ay pasensya na. Kasi meron kaming timber permit. At ang nagbigay ng authority para putulin namin ang mga puno na ito ay yung DENR, the Department of Environment, Natural Resources. Kaya nag-complain ang mga minors. Isn't it that the purpose of the DENR is to protect our environment? Bakit pa sila ang nag-i-issue ng authority to cut trees? So, that is one of the issues. But another issue is, pwede bang ang minors ay questionin ang pang-aabuso natin sa ating environment? To tell you, yes. In the case of Oposa versus Factoran, the minors have the personality to sue on behalf of the succeeding generations when there is a destruction of environment is concerned. So, let's go to the case of Victoriano versus Elizalde Rope Workers Union. So, paano tayo nagkaroon ng kaso na ito? Under Section 18 ng Article 2 ng ating Constitution, nakalagay kasi doon na the state affirms labor as a primary social economic force. It shall protect the rights of workers and promote their welfare. So what happened in this case? Ang sabi ng ating saligang batas, dapat proteksyonan natin ang welfare o yung benefit ng ating workers. Okay? So what happened here is, there is a person by the name of Benjamin Victoriano who is a member of Iglesia ni Cristo. Ang Elizal de Rope ay corporation kung saan sila na-employ. Ang Elizal de Rope Workers Union, yan ang union ng empleyado ng lahat ng Elizal de Rope. Inulit ko si Victoriano, empleyado. Member siya ng iglesia. Ang Elizal de Rope Corporation kung saan sila employed. Ang Elizal de Rope Workers Union, yan ang union na kung saan lahat ng empleyado ng Elizal de Rope ay members. Okay. What happened now in this case? Sa batas ng Elizal de Rope Workers Union, lahat ay dapat na bago ka maging empleyado ng Elizal de Rope, kailangan na member ka ng union. Kung hindi ka member ng union, ikaw ay patatalsikin. Si Victoriano, ayaw niyang maging member ng union kasi sa kanilang batas sa iglesia, hindi ka pwedeng maging member ng ibang organizations katulad ng unions. So, ano ang decision ng Elizal de Rope Corporation? Tanggalin si Victoriano. Dahil ayaw niyang maging member ng union, tanggalin siya bilang empleyado. Nag-complain si Victoriano. Sabi ni Victoriano, bakit niyo ako tatanggalin? Dahil lang ayaw ko maging member ng union? Unfair yun. O ano ang sabi ng ating Estado? Tama si Victoriano. Kailangan na bigyan natin ng proteksyon ang mga empleyado. Kung ayaw nilang maging members ng union, so be it, hayaan nyo lang. Pero hindi nangangahulugan na tatanggalin nyo sila. So, next is, we have the case of Pamatong versus Camelec. Paano at bakit tayo nagkaroon ng kaso entitled Pamatong versus Camelec? This is because of Section 26, Article 2 of the Constitution, which states that the state shall guarantee equal access to opportunities for public service and prohibit political dynasties as may be defined by law. Ang question lang naman ni Pamatong dito ay yung equal access. Dapat pantay-pantay ang pagpasok sa government. Yan ang ibig sabihin ng equal access. So, ang nangyari kasi dito, this was way back 2004 presidential election. Alam nyo, si Eli Pamatong, sikat na abogado ito. Bar top notcher. So, gusto niyang tumakbong president way back 2004. But dineclare siya na nuisance candidate. Ibig sabihin, pampagulo lang na kandidato, kaya dinisqualify. Kaya nag-complain siya. Sabi niya, bakit ako na abogado, top notcher pa sa bar examination, ay dinisqualify na tumakbong presidente? Samantalang si Fernando Po Jr. na isang actor ay qualify na tumakbong presidente. Nasaan na ngayon ang Section 26, Article 2 of the Constitution, which provides na dapat equal ang access natin sa opportunity sa public service. Ang sabi ng Supreme Court, Eli Pamatong, hindi namin minamalit ang inyong kakayahan kasi alam namin magaling kang abogado. It only happened na sa batas ng Camelec, dapat ikaw ay may political party para ma-qualify ka na presidential candidate. Nataon na wala siyang political party. So, dahil doon, siya ay dinisqualify. No? So, legal ang pag-disqualify sa kanya. Kaya, ano ang qualification for a person to run as president? Dapat na, maliban sa nakalagay sa Constitution, dapat na may political party siya. Pwede bang maging independent, katulad ni Po? Yes. Basta patunayan niya na kayang-kaya niyang mangampanya nationwide. So, that's it. This is only our discussion. Next week is I will be posting the discussion in citizenship and the other topics. And this is only our discussion, which is the scope of our recitation next week. No? So, Ano pa bang masasabi ko? No? Goodbye and please study, listen to the discussion at majority ng tatanungin ko sa ating recitation next week will be yung contents ng PowerPoint at yung nasabi ko sa discussion. No? So, thank you and good day and God bless.